2006, the America's Public Broadcasting Company aired a documentary on a man by the name of Dietrich Bonhoeffer. I think we got a picture of Dietrich. Yeah, there we go. This man was Martin Luther King Jr.'s hero. As a matter of fact, he was a hero to many millions of people around the world. The calendars of the Evangelical Lutheran Church and the Episcopal Church, they commemorate him on April the 9th because that's the date that he was hanged. You see, Dietrich Bonhoeffer lived from February 4th, 1906 to April 9th, 1945, and he was a German Lutheran pastor and a theologian who paid dearly with his life because he resisted the Nazis, especially Hitler. Banned from preaching and teaching, he headed an illegal seminary that opposed the anti-Semitic policies of Adolf Hitler. In 1939, Bonhoeffer joined a hidden group of high-ranking military officers to overthrow the regime, and he was part of a group that wanted to assassinate Hitler. But he got arrested. April of 1943. 4 years later, after the money that was used was traced back to him because he helped some of the Jews get out of Germany, he was charged with conspiracy, and he was sent to prison for a year and a half. And then Adolf Hitler's assassination failed. And Bonhoeffer had connections to those conspirators. So he was moved to a series of prisons and concentration camps, and it ended with his hanging 3 weeks before the liberation of the city. And also hanged with him were his brother and his 2 brothers-in-law. It's been said that vigilance is the cost of liberty. And what I want you to see through the story of Dietrich Bonhoeffer is that he definitely was a believer who stood up and was counted. And we're going to find out today that Esther was another person who stood up to be counted. You know, Esther's a compelling story to share, but I'm going to tell you what, today's passage, chapter 5 of Esther, that gave me some problems. What in the world can we talk about out of Esther chapter 5? Listen, we're not in any kind of resistance right now. We're not in any kind of protest movement. We're not a political group. We don't have a social agenda. We're not in a war yet. We're not in revolution or anarchy. So how can we, as we read through Esther 5 today, possibly understand what's happening in this chapter? What are the principles? What are the applications, the implications that we can look at for you and I today? Those of us sitting here this morning, and we're calling ourselves Christians, then we are the agents of change, regardless of time, regardless of place, and regardless of circumstance. We are the agents of change. You know what that means? We can no longer sit on the sidelines and be cheerleaders, cheering on those who are out in the battle. We have to stand up, and we have to be counted. But the question I'm going to pose this morning is, how can we change things? What is your role? What is my role in these times of anti-Christian movements? I think we can learn a lot from Esther today. Chapter 5, we're going to begin in verse 1. And the first thing we need to understand, if we're going to be involved in change, is that we need to be prudent and not pushy when we try to present change. Be prudent and not pushy. Can I just tell you, that is so hard for me? Because if I've got an idea for change and I think it's going to be good, you know what I'm doing. You got to join me. I'm going to push like crazy. It's so hard not to be pushy. But let's look and see how Esther did it. Chapter 5, beginning in verse 1. On the 3rd day, Esther put on her royal robes and stood in the inner court of the palace in front of the king's hall. The king was sitting on his royal throne in the hall, facing the entrance. When he saw Queen Esther standing in the court, he was pleased with her, so he held out his gold scepter that was in his hand. And so Esther approached and touched the tip of the scepter. Then the king asked, "What is it, Queen Esther? What's your request?" "Even up to half of the kingdom, it will be given to you." "If it pleases the king," replied Esther, "let the king together with Haman come today to a banquet that I have prepared for him. Bring Haman at once, so that we may do what Esther asked." How many of you like to have people over for dinner? Well, let me ask you this way. How many of you like to be invited to somebody's house for dinner? It's all about non-cooking, right? Well, I got 3 little stories I want to share with you about dinner. A certain man invited the pastor and his wife for dinner, and it was little Joey's job to set the table. But when it came time to eat, Joey's mother said with surprise, "Why didn't you give Mrs. Brown a knife and fork, dear?" "Well, I didn't think I needed to." As everyone listened to Joey explain, "I heard Daddy say that she always eats like a horse." Be careful what you say around kids. Here's another one. A young couple invited their elderly preacher for Sunday dinner, and while they were in the kitchen preparing the meal, the minister asked their 5-year-old son what they were having for dinner. "Goat," the little boy replied. "Goat?" replied the startled man of the cloth. "Are you sure about that?" "Yep," the youngster said. "I heard Dad say to Mom, today is just as good as any day to have the old goat for dinner." These are preacher jokes. You know that, right? Only one more. There's a couple that invited some people to dinner. At the table, the mother turned to her 6-year-old daughter and asked her to say the blessing. "I wouldn't know what to say," she replied. "Just say what you hear Mommy say." Oh, yeah. The little girl bowed her head and she prayed, "Dear Lord, why on earth did I invite all these people to dinner?" The dinner table. Food. I think those are 2 of God's greatest tools to get us together, to create the fellowship that we need to have, but it's also more important than even that. See, around the table, people make plans. Around the table, decisions are made. See, and Esther knew this. She was very shrewd in choosing to have a banquet for the king and Haman. You see, the effort of Esther in rescuing the Jews was critical. But first thing she had to do was to stop Haman. And I'm sure she thought long and hard and decided to do things her way. This is the first time that she doesn't run to Mordecai to find advice, because she knows that Mordecai would not have been pleased with her plans. Here's what I think about Esther as she made these plans. Esther used her head more than her heart. She used her head in these preparations. She was careful. She was meticulous in these preparations. Because, see, her life was at stake as well. She had better choose the right weapons for this war. And she did. She did. You know the weapons that Esther chose for this battle? They were the weapons of gentleness, patience, and wisdom. You see, Esther didn't rush into that inner court. She didn't make any demands to see the king. She didn't threaten. She didn't nag. She didn't cry out. She didn't say, "Choose me or Haman." Nope, none of that. She's pretty cool. She put on her regal best for the occasion, and she waited till the king was by himself. And she knew that he had time for her. And she knew, because of the way that he received her, that he was in a good mood. Because, see, she understood that if she hurried him or pressured him, as Queen Vashti did, it would have killed the relationship she had with the king. See, she knew she was queen. Queen Esther. We read that clear back in verse 2. And on the king's good day and his good side, and that's all Esther wanted. Because if she had rushed in, if she had demanded to see the king, if she had said it's either me or Haman, that would not have put the king in a very good mood, would it? He would have been grouchy, he would have been gloomy, he'd have been griping. So from this, I read that Esther was very insightful in the way that she approached the king. Now, some of you are thinking, if you're just reading through this and you read that, you might be thinking that, man, she's a fool. She could have had half his kingdom. Why not? Why not strike when the iron is hot? You got it. He promised her in verse 3 half his kingdom. But when he promised that to Esther, that was in vain. Because she was focused on her plan. So she didn't have any interest in half the kingdom. But she did want to accomplish two things. The first thing is I want you to note that she was not motivated by revenge, and she was not motivated by being bloodthirsty. Esther was motivated by reason. By reason. Not self-serving or selfish reasons. But secondly, she wanted to gain the king's trust. Trust in her decision making. She wanted to see if the king was serious about his promise. And if the offer was good for another day, or if the king was just impulsive and temperamental. You see, if he regretted his decision later, her head was at stake, literally. You see, if we look at verse 2, we know that Esther won the king's favor. We know that she won his pleasure. But she had not yet gained his trust. And she wanted his trust. She didn't want to be a flavor of the month. She didn't want to be a cause for regret tomorrow. She wanted to be trusted by the king. And so we need to understand that we can't be pushy, but we got to be prudent if we're presenting a change. And secondly, we need to be peaceable, not provoked, when preparing for change. Peaceable and not provoked. Is that not difficult for you? Am I the only one here that finds that difficult? Peaceable? What in the world is that? If you don't do what I want to do, there's not a lot of peace in that. But yet, if we follow Esther's example, she was peaceable, not provoked, in preparing for that change. Look at verse 9. Haman went out that day happy and in high spirits. But when he saw Mordecai at the king's gate and observed that he neither rose nor showed fear in his presence, he was filled with rage against Mordecai. Nevertheless, Haman restrained himself and he went home. I'm sure you've heard this story about the little boy that was bouncing up and down in the backseat of the car. Mom attempted to discipline her son when she said, "Sit down and keep still." Boy refused. He didn't listen. He didn't obey. He just kept jumping up and down. Mom said, "Stop it. Sit down." But the boy kept bouncing. He was a super ball. The mother got to the boy, and she grabbed the boy's shoulders and forcibly put him into the seat of the back car, whereupon the feisty and furious lad folded his hands. He put them on his lap, and he said, "I'm sitting down on the outside, but I'm standing up on the inside." You know, that reminds me a lot of us. Thomas Al Kempe said, when anger enters the mind, wisdom departs. What a deep saying. You see, Haman didn't follow Esther's example at all. His attempt to force change didn't last because it was unhealthy. And it was negatively motivated. He was motivated by passion, not by peace. And things got worse for Haman because his skin got thinner and thinner. Haman already knew that Mordecai rejected the notion that he was a god or had achieved divine status. But the way Haman treated him next, the way Mordecai treated him next, made his blood boil. Put him in a pretty nasty mood. You ever seen anybody so angry the veins just bulge in the side of their neck? Husbands, if that's your wives, get out of the house. It's no longer safe for you to be there. Even though you caused the anger, I'm sure. You see, before Mordecai would not bow or kneel or pay him honor because it was a religious deal. He didn't pay any honor to anyone except God. But this time, Mordecai further insulted him by not rising or showing fear in his presence. This aging Jewish man, he didn't budge and he didn't kowtow. The Hebrew word for showed fear occurs only 3 times in the Bible. The translation for the other 2 times are tremble. Mordecai didn't tremble in the presence of Haman. He didn't sweat. He didn't step back. He didn't feel threatened. He just said, well, here comes Haman again. But on the other side, Haman, he couldn't bear it that Mordecai would not treat him as a god. And it's gone on far too long for him. Mordecai didn't even show him fear and respect deserving a man of his lofty status. Haman, listen, Mordecai was worse than a nobody. He was a nobody. But it caused Haman to become a madman because of the way that he treated him. In Haman's mind, he thought he deserved that courtesy. He deserved the attention. He deserved that greeting. But not as far as Mordecai was concerned. In fact, Mordecai pretty much just ignored him. And what do you think that did to Haman? I'm surprised I don't read somewhere in the scripture that his head blew off at the top, because he became so infuriated with Mordecai. There's a Hebrew statement that says he was filled with rage. And it's similar to the first time that we see his rage, a full-blown anger in chapter 3, verse 5. But this time, he directed that anger against Mordecai. But unlike the last time, there was nobody to direct his anger against. He was hopping mad. Let's just be honest. We're in church, so we got to be honest today, right? Have you ever been hopping mad? Come on, let me see. Who's been hopping mad? I got to get both of them up. Because there are times, yes, I have been hopping mad. Well, that's Mordecai. That's Haman. He is just hopping mad. But yet, he restrained himself and went home. But when it says he restrained himself, it does not mean that he calmed down, because he is yet to calm down. He is still fuming. He did not calm down. All it meant to him was he was delaying the vengeance he was taking on the Jews. That's all it meant. Haman's anger and hostility didn't subside. It didn't subside that day, that night, the next day. It just did not subside. But there is something very interesting about this scene. Haman never faced his enemy. despite blowing his top. He was mad at Mordecai, but he never sat down and talked with Mordecai about it. He never confronted the problem. He kept it all in. It was tucked away nice and neat. They never talked. They met. Haman saw him as he would go by the king's gate, and Mordecai refused to stand. They met. They just never talked. Can I guess this morning that many of us have had our Haman moments where we are hopping mad with somebody, but we never talked to him. We never talked to him. We just thought, oh, it'll go by. We'll be fine. We'll put it under the rug. You see, Haman never talked to Mordecai. Therefore, the problem was never confronted or dealt with. And when we're hopping mad, if we've got a problem, then we need to sit and we need to talk with the people that we have the problem with. If we don't confront it and we keep it inside, what do you think is going to happen? Have you ever heard the term spillover? And what that means is you will become so full of anger and bitterness that it will spill over to the people that it has nothing to do with. If you do something and I blow up at you where I should have got about this angry, that wasn't yours. That was somebody else's. And folks, we do that a lot in our culture, in our society, even in the church. We do that a lot. We don't confront the issues. And when we don't and we hold it inside, what happens? What happens when you stir the pot? Probably the best example is, you ever taken a bottle of pop? And what happens? And that's what happens to us. If we've got an issue, we become hopping mad and we don't deal with it, that's what happens to us. See, Haman right now, he had a great chance right here to get things off his chest. But Haman turned the other cheek. That's a scriptural term, isn't it? But he turned the other cheek for all the wrong reasons, right? If he had bothered to find out, he would have discovered that unlike him, Mordecai's reasons for dealing with Haman the way he did had no personal connection at all. It was not about Haman. It was not about Mordecai. It was about the frailty, the insignificance, the unworthiness of man. Why Haman turned the other cheek was not because it was a small thing. It's because he had big plans. He refrained himself because he had worse plans for Mordecai. Death. He wanted Mordecai to die a certain way and not just a natural death. Prudent, peaceful. Here's one I don't even want to write down. Be patient. The only people that have patience are doctors. I'm convinced of that. See, we got to be patient. It's not personal when we are pushing for a change. Chapter 5, beginning in verse 10. Calling brothers and calling together his friends and Zeresh, his wife, Haman boasted to them about his vast wealth, his many sons, and all the ways the king had honored him, and how he had elevated him above the other nobles and officials. And that's not all. Haman added, I am the only person Queen Esther invited to accompany the king to the banquet she gave. And she has invited me along with the king again tomorrow. But all this gives me no satisfaction as long as I see that Jew Mordecai sitting at the king's gate. His wife Zeresh and all his friends said to him, have a gallows built, 75 feet high, and ask the king Oh, and have Mordecai hanged on it. Then go with the king and to the dinner and be happy. Be happy. This delighted Haman. And he had a gallows built, 75 feet high. Gordon MacDonald, some of you may recognize that name. He wrote in a book called A Resilient Life about meeting a man who was imprisoned for 5 years with the South African president, Mandela. They had rooms. Nelson Mandela and Robben Island, the man and Mandela had rooms next to each other. And Gordon MacDonald eagerly asked the man what the great Nelson Mandela had taught him. And the man answered, he taught me to forgive. He said, I was a bitter young man, and Mandela picked up on it immediately when we first met. And he said to me, son, you are no use to our movement until you learn to forgive the white man. You can hate his cause, but you cannot hate him. I think we can all learn from that. Because today we associate the things that people do with who they are. And we got to be able to separate that. We can hate the sin, but we have to love the sinner. You know, that's so easy to say, standing up here on this platform. But when I walk down those steps and out that door, that becomes as hard for me as it is for you. It is so difficult to separate the sin from the sinner. Now, it's obvious to me that Haman never met Mandela. See that Hebrew phrase for Haman's vast wealth? It means the glory of his riches. That's what he wanted to talk about. But you know, more than any other person in Scripture, Solomon is the one most associated with that Hebrew word, riches. But yet, Haman thought his riches made him so much better than Mordecai. But the reality of it is it didn't make him more godly. It did not make him wiser. It didn't make him smarter. It didn't humble him that he was an outsider. He was an Edomite that made his way to the top in Babylon. He did not share his wealth, talents, or experience with others. Worse, riches made him vain, boastful, and arrogant. Does that sound familiar? There are so many people today that they have some wealth, not even a great deal of wealth. They have some wealth, and they become so boastful, so arrogant, and vain in what they have. I used to go golfing in South Carolina every year. We'd go down for a week, spend the week together. I started going down there because I was doing estate planning for the children's home, and most of the guys that went, they were old. How's that? So we did some estate planning for them while we were down there, but it was a great time. And there was one guy, Don Volmuth, who passed away not long ago. He and I roomed together. Don Volmuth was a very creative man, a lot to do with trains, tracks. He built a barge out of train material, and when the barge got down the Amazon, they took it apart, made the train tracks, and they took the train out into the Amazon to get the wood to bring back to the boat. Crazy. He sold that patent for $7 million. Then he sold his entire business shortly after that for $21 million. So we're sitting down there playing golf, and I'm thinking, he said, let's go to dinner. And I'm thinking, I can't afford dinner with this guy. He said, let's go to Wendy's. Oh, I was happy. So we went to Wendy's for dinner, and we came back, and we just started talking about church and church involvement. And he sat on the edge of his bed, and he cried like a baby. He said that nobody wanted him to be part of their church because everybody was afraid that he was going to come in, become the chairman of the board, and buy his way through the church. And he bawled like a baby just because he wanted to belong. So just because somebody has wealth does not mean that they should not be welcome in the church. Because they have the same heart and soul that those of us who don't have money have. Even the honor of the private audience with the queen and the king, he was spoiled by his nagging displeasure of Mordecai. Everything paled and soured in light of picturing Mordecai faces at him and laughing in his face. Haman didn't want to see Mordecai again. He didn't want to see him for another second. He didn't want to run into him again at the king's gate. So instead of enjoying the moment, enjoying the banquet, he was bitter, even to death. The truth was that Mordecai had little to do with Haman's present state of mind. Mordecai wasn't playing any tricks. Haman was his own worst enemy. And can I tell you, if you don't forgive and you hang on and become bitter, you are your own worst enemy. You get bitter and angry at somebody, who's hurting? They don't even know you're bitter and angry at them. So the only person you're hurting is me. We need to understand that. Mordecai was his own worst enemy. He had already signed the Jews' death warrant. So why bother with that little guy standing out there named Mordecai? See, hanging him the next day, that's just bad advice that came from his friends and his wife, because he had an ethnic cleansing about to happen. So his wife and friends, they didn't help with matters by catering to his lust to kill. In truth, the advice that they gave him, not good at all. They should have been saying things like, well, it's not going to be long. As a matter of fact, he's already dead. He just don't know it. Right? Ignore the small stuff. Instead, they advised him to put Mordecai out of his misery, to take things into his own hands, and to make a death wish come true. And if that's the case, I can just imagine that Haman that night. You ever been like that? You've been upset about something, and you lay in bed at night and you try to figure it out and solve the problem. You get no sleep. You toss and you turn and you carry on. And I imagine that's exactly what happened with Haman. He got no sleep that night because in his mind, he's preparing those gallows. He's not sleeping. He's figuring out who he's going to pay to do his dirty work for him. You ever counted the cost to stand up? You ever weighed the consequences of circumstances before you choose a fight? Boy, I wish I'd have done that early on in my marriage. Woo! I'm a whole lot more peaceful now than I was then. I could fight over the toothbrush not being in the right place. We need to count the cost and the circumstances before we choose to fight. This morning, are you caught up in the petty things and the trivial things? The sneaky motives that you think other people have? 2 Timothy chapter 2, verses 23 and 24. I'll close with this. Don't have anything to do with foolish and stupid arguments. Can I repeat that? Don't have anything to do with foolish and stupid arguments. I don't know that I have ever seen a smart argument. He says, don't have anything to do with the foolish and stupid arguments, because you know they produce quarrels. And the Lord's servant must not quarrel. Instead, he must be kind to everyone, able to teach, and not resentful. Write that down on a card somewhere and put it on your bathroom mirror, because that's vital in our culture today. Because when we go out and we're having conversations with those anti-Christian movements that are out there, the thing that we want to do is to get pushy and to fight and to quarrel with them because we're right and they're not. And when you do that, you lose. You lose. We got to remember that love and grace come before truth. We know the truth. We have the truth. It's all about in how we give that to someone else. Esther was so smart. She was so smart. If you got somebody that appears to be your enemy, invite him out for coffee. Invite him out to have lunch. Because that's where great things can happen. God gave us those two tools so that we can make a difference in people's lives. And so, people are going to make a difference in our lives as well. Think about that today. This chapter was, I love, when I first read this chapter, I said, what in the world do we get out of that? But after I read it a few times, there's a whole lot there for us. We need to follow the example of Esther and not the example of Haman as we look to bring about change in this world that we live in. That right now they just don't like us. We need to give them a reason to like us. Have coffee, have lunch, have dinner, to change lives for Jesus, because that's what we're about. We are his agents of change.